The dismembered remains of 25-year-old gay adult video actor William Newton were found in a trash can on October 29, 1990, leaving Los Angeles in shock. Despite the best efforts of the police, they were unable to solve the murder case, but several years later, a group of amateur detectives set out on a mission for justice. Through persistence and determination, these sleuths eventually discovered the killer who had been hiding in plain sight all along. Hi and welcome back to Mysterious Cases 007. If you are new here, please consider subscribing to Mysterious Cases 007 as it helps us motivate to create more intriguing content for you. Today we're going to look at a 33-year-old cold case that was solved in 2023 because of a podcast. So without further ado, let's go right into this mystery. Today's story takes us to Los Angeles, a thriving metropolis in Southern California known for its iconic Hollywood sign, world-famous beaches, and sidewalks lined with movie stars. William Newton was born on July 26, 1965, in the Wisconsin city of Eau Claire. His father was Richard Harriman. They were not married. 6 months after Newton was born, his half-sister Oliver Michelle was born. The two were essentially inseparable as children. As he grew older, Newton discovered his passion for art and frequently filled his free time with creative writing. His poems were a reflection of his soul, and his imagination ran wild. He also received an A in school. The change in environment was too abrupt for Newton, but over time he slowly started to get used to it. Newton was only able to complete his freshman year of high school in Ladysmith, which is also located in the state of Wisconsin. Richard once told the media about his son Newton. Newton spent a good portion of his childhood in the city where he was born. It was there he attended both primary and middle school. When Newton was only 16 and had made up his mind to start living with his father, he was confident that he would be welcomed with open arms. However, this turned out to be false when he arrived at Richard's home in Eau Claire and was met with a shocking reception instead of the welcoming environment he had anticipated. Newton soon grew weary of the seemingly endless cycle of moving from one place to another and desired more stability. So one day he packed his bags and traveled down to be with his father Richard. Newton and David met while David was in the region serving as a judge for a local gay magazine's beauty contest. This was the beginning of an unexpected and new adventure for Newton. Gay adult videos were David's area of expertise as a producer of adult films. David recognized Newton's promise and took him under his wing, exposing him to the business and assisting him in getting parts in numerous of his films. In 1987, Newton and David's commercial partnership evolved into a love one, and the two went on to create their own adult film production firm, which they called London Ray Productions. When money started to flow, Newton and David were able to start living the high life. Newton started working at the company, bringing his skills as a movie producer, makeup artist, and set designer to the table. He produced films under the alias Bill E. London and went on to act in several movies such as Billy London and Billy Porter. They would frequently film movies in their apartment, and Newton would redecorate the rooms to make it seem as though they were shooting in different locations. One dumpster gave the homeless man the shock of his life when he opened it. A human head was sitting in the middle of the trash, staring back at him. The rest of the body was nowhere to be seen, but the homeless man could see a pair of feet that had been carelessly thrown beside the head. It was all too much for him to process, and he quickly raised an alarm, warning others about the vile situation. The decapitated head was discovered shortly after police officers arrived on the site in their cars, and Newton, a retired investigator, was quickly identified as the owner. It was just so heinous in our mind that something like this could happen, and it didn't matter to me that Bill was gay or that he worked in the adult content field. Wendy Burnt was one of the first police officers to arrive at the scene on the day of the murder and was shaken to her core by how brutal it was. The results of Newton's autopsy, according to Wendy, showed that he had methamphetamine in his system before he was slain, and there was evidence that he had been strangled before being beheaded. Detectives launched an investigation right away to find out what exactly had happened to Newton and how he came to be in such a state. Wendy was in charge of the team of investigators assigned to the case, and she made sure to give it everything she had. According to Wendy, in the months that followed the murder, authorities investigated all of the tips that came in, but none of them proved to be helpful. Nobody appeared to know who had killed Newton or where the rest of his corpse was. For a long time, detectives had nothing concrete to work with, and eventually, the case went cold. In 2005, 15 years after the murder, the Los Angeles Police Department said it was working to reopen the case. However, this time, too, nothing really came of the investigation, and everything fell silent. After this, the case made the news once more at the end of the following year, in 2006. This time, a reporter by the name of Mickey Ski allegedly made the claim that Newton's father had contacted him and complained that the Los Angeles Police Department had ignored the investigation into his son's death and could have done much more to try to solve it. The LAPD responded to this allegation by releasing a statement informing the public that they were still working to solve the case and had not given up on it. Sadly, Richard never saw justice served for the murder of his son. He died at home on May 30, 2011. At the age of 65. In 2020, best friends and authors Christopher Rice and Eric Shaw Quinn became fascinated with Newton's slaying. After reading about the case in an article on Adult Entertainment, Christopher became aware of it, and the incident has since stuck in his memory. In addition, Eric and Christopher co-host a podcast called The Dinner Party Show, which they started in 2012. Because there had never been an arrest and no publicly disclosed leads in the case, Christopher decided to bring up Newton's murder during one of the podcast episodes. He then asked the listeners for any information they might have that would be useful in solving the case. 2 months later, Christopher and Eric recorded a new episode of their podcast in which they discussed some of the information they had discovered since the last time they discussed Newton's murder. According to Christopher, an unnamed man had contacted him and claimed to have important information about the murder case. The man claimed to have seen Newton at the Rage nightclub the night before he was found dead in a dumpster. There was no question that Dahmer's characteristics were consistent with someone who would have murdered Newton, but there was no way to prove this as Dahmer had already passed away after being attacked and beaten to death by a fellow prisoner in November 1994. When Detective John Lamberti of the Los Angeles Police Department became interested in this case in 2012, Christopher continued to hold out hope that someone with additional information would come forward. After reviewing all the materials his predecessors had on the murder, Detective Lamberti was astounded by the amount of work they had put into solving it. They investigated the hell out of this case, Detective Lamberti told the media. Lamberti also started to examine every viewpoint more carefully. One of the first things he did was conduct a Google search for Newton's name. In the search results, he discovered the podcast episode of Christopher and Eric where they discussed Newton's murder and theorized that Dahmer was his killer. Clicking on it and listening to everything the two men had to say did nothing but pique Detective Lamberti's interest in the case. Later, he contacted both Christopher and Eric to arrange a meeting. A documentary filmmaker named Rachel Mason became captivated with the case and was working on her own covert investigation when she accidentally learned about Newton's murder. This happened back in 2017 when she was working on a documentary about a gay adult bookstore called The Circus of Books. In search of relevant information for the film, she visited a local activist and writer named Mike Sosmanski. When Mike and Rachel were searching through one of Mike's notebooks, a brutal newspaper article from 1990 about Newton's murder and how the authorities had no leads as to who had carried out the ACT suddenly fell out and caught Rachel's eye. Mike had an old collection of West Hollywood photos and he had agreed to let her look through them. It was during this time that Rachel remembered the story she had heard from Mike about Newton's murder. Rachel asked Mike right away about what it was all about, and Mike gladly gave her all the details he knew surrounding the mysterious murder. She was intrigued by the story she heard, but she did not think much of it after she went to work on the Circus of Books film, and after finishing it, she immediately started looking for a new project to work on. In her determination to learn everything she could about this, Rachel decided to turn to the public for any advice or information they might have. At that moment, she got a message from Clark Williams, a gay stay-at-home father who lives in Sherman Oaks. Williams thought he could help Rachel fill in the blanks in Newton's life story because he grew up in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, just like Newton. Williams had a unique perspective on what it was like growing up in Eau Claire. She eagerly scheduled a meeting with Williams to hear what he had to say. During the meeting, she learned that Williams had first learned about Newton's murder while scrolling through a Facebook group. He had stumbled on a specific post about the 1990 murder and it had immediately caught his attention. Rachel was thrilled at the new development and wondered if she had finally gotten someone who could shed some light on the mystery of Newton's upbringing. After meeting Rachel and sharing everything he knew with her, Williams said he started to nurture an even deeper interest in the murder. Eventually, Detective Lamberti also learned about Rachel and Williams' interest in the case, and he soon brought them into the fold. Williams said, "What I really wanted to do was to help tell Billy's story because I think he reflected the lives of so many young gay men and teenagers who came up in that time." Soon after that, he discovered that a local amateur detective named Rick Paskey had devoted a significant amount of his time and effort to solving the murder of Newton after it had happened. Williams was disappointed to learn that Rick had passed away and that there was no way to contact him. After conducting the extensive study, private investigator Williams made the startling discovery that Rick, the proprietor of a skate shop, was also involved in the production of gay adult videos. Williams investigated deeper and discovered a link between Rick's film credentials and a possible suspect named Darrell Lynn Madden, who was serving a life sentence for the murder of 2 men at the time Williams' investigation was conducted. Williams was able to receive a book in which Darrell mentioned killing Stephen as well as another killing in Los Angeles, which Williams thought to be the murder of Newton. After making contact with Detective Lamberti, he learned that the homosexual adult film production company where Darrell had worked was implicated in the murder of Newton and that Darrell had admitted to killing someone in the same city. The research provided a sense of justice, although it is still unknown where the rest of Newton's body is located. Who do you think mutilated Newton's body, and what do you think they did to the rest of it? Comment below and share with us what you think. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.